Invariably, when I attend business functions, people will ask me, what do you do? And I tell them I'm an executive coach. And then they look at me and they say, what's an executive coach? And what do you do? And so I explain to them that I come alongside leaders and I help to make them better. I help them to produce better results with their teams. And they say, well, how do you do that? Well, the reality is that the majority of people have a lot of talent, a lot of knowledge, a lot of capability, but there's usually little gaps and things that they don't understand how they come together. And so I will explain to them as a leadership coach, as an executive coach, what I try to do is fill the gaps and connect the dots. So then, as I had a conversation with somebody the other day, they asked me, so I understand leadership, but I don't know how to make it actionable. Meaning I understand the concept of leadership, but how do you systematically actually go and develop other people and become a better leader? We have schools that teach us how to be good managers, but the challenge nowadays, or it's probably always been this way, is that people don't like to be managed. You manage things and you lead people. And so here's what I want to give you is a little bit of a model that will allow you to make leadership actionable for yourself and with your organization. The simplest way I can explain it is that the role of a leader in its simplest form is to get a team from here to somewhere else, and we'll call that somewhere else there. So ultimately, all you're trying to do as a leader is there's some purpose, there's some vision, there's some direction that we want to go, and we call that there. Other people call that vision. But if you don't know where you're going, as the old saying goes, any path will get you there. So the challenge we have is that step one of being a leader is you have to have a vision, you have to have a destination, we have to have a somewhere that we want to get to. Step two comes down to courageously defining where we are today. It's no different than with GPS, if you think about it. Often you think, well, the very first thing that we do when we get on our phone with GPS is we put in where we are. No, the very first thing you put in is your destination. Where do you want to get to? The second step is critical to make sure that your current location is accurate relative to where you are. Otherwise, when you set the GPS to give you directions, it can't give you proper directions on what the next steps are to take if you haven't properly defined where here is today. And the challenge with a lot of leaders nowadays is that they don't properly or courageously define where they truly are today. And part of that is a challenge with vulnerability. And instead what they do is they try to sugarcoat it and they create all kinds of problems for themselves because they take the wrong steps and the wrong turns to try and get to this ultimate vision. Then step three is in this area here, which you could call the mission, or how do we get from here to there. And so in this session, what I want to do is outline the simple formula, and I'm going to call that the formula for leadership success. And it ultimately comes down to these components. Number one, you need an executable plan. In other words, we need to have a plan for how we take step A, step B, step C. Often what happens is people have these grandiose ideas of where they want to go, and they may identify where they're at today, but they don't set forward an actual plan step by step of how they're going to get there. In other words, their idea just becomes a dream and it's not actionable. So in order to make it actionable, we need to have a plan. But number two, it needs to be executable. You can't just have this grandiose plan that isn't actually executable. And that's why this needs to be broken down into actual action steps that other people can act on. But if you have an executable plan, you then need engaged talent. In other words, you need people. You can't do it all yourself. You need other people who join into your vision and help you to execute the plan. The challenge is, though, just having bodies around doesn't accomplish what we want to accomplish. We need people that are truly engaged in what we're trying to do. Now, I'll explain engagement at another point in time, but suffices to say right now, engaged talent is like thinking about an engine and a transmission, and you can have all the horsepower in the world, which is your talent, but unless it's actually connected to the rear wheels of the car, that car is not going anywhere. You can rev that engine all you want, but that car is not going anywhere. You need to engage it, and that's where the clutch and the gears come into play to actually connect the engine with the rear wheels. So engage talent. But then number 3, once you have the plan, you've got the talent, what you need to have is buy-in from those people together with accountability. Now, accountability, especially in the car business, is something that is massively misused. I wrote an article on that on healthydealer.com. You can find that article that talks all about accountability and the difference between that and policing. And in a future session, I'm going to break down the difference between accountability and policing and show you why it is critical to have true accountability, which is not possible unless you get the buy-in of the people. And the final step in all of this comes down to we need to have feedback connected with tweaks. In other words, if we have a plan, we've got engaged people who are bought in and are willing to be held accountable, that's going to produce some kind of a result. Once we see what those results are, there comes a point in time, let's say we're executing like this, there comes a point in time where we need to take a milestone and say, where are we at? Are we achieving what we ultimately want to achieve? And if where we actually want to get to is up there, during this period, we need to make some tweaks. But if we don't actually get feedback that tells us where we're at today in our path of execution, we won't know what tweaks to make. And so we make some tweaks, and then we start the process again, because the plan probably needs to be adjusted. We may need greater engagement from our team. Maybe there's an issue of buyback or accountability. And so really what this means is that there are 8 key elements here that a leader needs to focus on. A needs a plan. B needs to be executable. C needs talent. D, that is engaged. E, that is bought in. F, that is willing to be held accountable. G, that receives the feedback. And H, that applies tweaks in order to get to where we want to go. And if you as a leader focus on this simple formula and recognize that this is your job right here, get a team from here to there. It's not about you as a person. It's not about you and your power and what you're going to achieve for yourself. It's about what you do for the team. And you follow this formula step by step, and you will achieve your plan. Now, one more thing I'm going to point out is there's this model called intentionality. And within intentionality, it starts out with philosophy. What do you truly believe? Because those philosophies or those beliefs are going to translate into choices which translate into actions. And those actions are what are going to determine, again, executable plan comes down to actually fulfilling certain actions. And the challenge is that these actions can either be positive or they can be negative. In other words, you can either take the action or by default you do nothing. And what happens over time is that people hesitate, they're not motivated, and by default, accidentally, they do nothing. Think about if you're sitting on your chair and you have to make the choice to get up out of your chair, otherwise you're going to stay seated in your chair the whole time. But once you make the choice, still nothing has happened until you act on that choice and you get up out of your chair. That's a positive action. The challenge is if you stay seated in your chair, life is going to pass you by and nothing happens. But that is what happens with so many people in life. And if you think about the simple thing like an alarm clock, an alarm clock was created by those people that want to take positive actions. But they also recognize that other people are reluctant and they put a snooze button on it. Because every now and then they don't feel, and we'll get into that in a future time as to what the role of feelings is, but people don't feel like taking that action and they hit the snooze button. And unfortunately, so often in life, people hit the snooze button when they actually need to get out of bed. And so what happens is, in the short term, those positive actions and those negative actions appear almost identical. It's hard to differentiate between the effects of the positive actions and what you're losing as a result of not doing those positive things. And think of it this way too. Another example, part of my story, you can go to mypennystory.com and read about how I lost 50 pounds when I turned 50 years of age. But it was very, very intentional as to what I did. And a large part of what has shaped my career and my life comes down to this model of intentionality. And so the idea here is this. In the short term, hard to tell the difference between a positive action and a negative action. And what I was going to say before is this idea that I could decide tomorrow morning I'm going to eat a dozen donuts. I won't notice any difference from one day to the next except probably have a sugar high. But I won't notice any difference in my weight, etc., from one day to the next because of that one time of eating a dozen donuts. However, it's that ongoing choice and action that leads to the results. And if I ate a dozen donuts every morning, you would certainly notice a big difference over time. And so that's what happens from these positive actions versus these negative actions. This leads to success, and this leads to failure. And the idea is that we need to constantly be making the choices, the tough choices, to take the positive actions that will lead us to success. Now, even if you're on this path to failure, you have an opportunity at some point if you take ownership. This principle of ownership is very powerful until you actually admit, and that's why in the 12-step program with an Alcoholics Anonymous, etc., the very first thing that people need to do is acknowledge and accept the fact that they are an alcoholic. And so for all of us, in order to make a change from the path of failure, we need to own where we're at and consciously make a decision that we're going to turn our actions the other way. And day by day, we're going to make the choices and take the small actions that are as easy to do as they are not to do. So there you have it. There is a very simple formula for success as a leader and how we make leadership actionable. In a future time, I'm going to get into each of these different pieces and explain to you how to focus specifically on them. Thanks for watching. Hope you'll join me in future.